Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Uh-oh, a laptop.
Yeah, I know, a laptop. Sorry about that. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with Melbourne Writers Festival and the Wheeler Centre. And before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're gathered tonight on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Just a little note that people can submit questions via Slido. Apparently that's happening above us throughout the evening, and that part of the Q&A will happen later on. We are here, of course, to talk to the wonderful Griffin Dunne. Griffin is an actor, director and producer, having starred in some of Hollywood's most memorable films, including John Landis's American Werewolf in London and Martin Scorsese's After Hours. He's appeared in television shows like This Is Us and I Love Dick, and can currently be seen in Darren Aronofsky's film Caught Stealing. He made the exquisite documentary The Centre Will Not Hold about his aunt, Joan Didion, and has directed Meg Ryan in Addicted to Love and Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock in Practical Magic, which will be screening tomorrow. He's joined us tonight to talk about all this and about his hilarious, deeply poignant and beautifully felt memoir, The Friday Afternoon Club. Please join me in welcoming Griffin Dunne.
Thank you.
Griffin, your family have been entwined with the fortunes of Hollywood almost from its inception, and often in salacious ways, I might add. Your great-great-uncle died in the arms of Rose Davies, who was Marion Davies' sister, who was the mistress of William Randolph Hearst. Your memoir, The Friday Afternoon Club, is littered with sentences like the following. I happened upon my father, who was toking on a joint with Harrison Ford, then a carpenter and unknown actor. Or, during one of my parents' extravagant parties, I got up to pee and found Judy Garland rifling through the medicine cabinet in my bathroom. Or my personal favourite, Elizabeth Montgomery, who later played Samantha in Bewitched, was my first babysitter. I wondered, what is the single most important thing that you've learned about celebrity as a result of your proximity to it?
Well, I was brought up, my father was from the earliest age, was a movie fanatic. And, but he was a very kind of delicate kid who had an older brother who was a very serious jock. And on his side of the room was football pendants, and on Dad's side were pictures of Tyrone Power and Betty Davis. And he just lived for movie stars and celebrity. And so when he moved to Hollywood, he cultivated these people to come to his house. The biggest directors from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and Billy Wilder and John Huston, and there would be David Niven and Joseph Cotten and Betty Davis, and he just couldn't believe that this was happening. And so there was such importance on celebrity for him that, as a kid, it made me a little uncomfortable. It didn't feel real, and so I've always, and then, later all of that, he sort of flamed out. He was a big drinker, he was alcoholic, and started to burn bridges and got very sloppy and ended up being drummed out of Hollywood, and the very people that came to his home and drank his booze and danced in his living room were now, buying the ashtrays. He had a garage sale, and all of his beloved possessions he was selling, and they would come and root through it, and he was dead. And so I always thought both celebrity and Hollywood was also, as much as I wanted to be an actor, I found it kind of scary.
Right.
All that attention on you, and at various points, when, I would, as an actor, I would have, come out and be really hot. I did this perverse thing of where, here I was, doing a dream come true of being the lead in a Martin Scorsese film. But I follow that up by producing a movie of which I'm not even in, and let that, hot actor stuff just dissipate. So I've always had a conflict.
An ambivalence.
An ambivalence about it, yeah.
And being surrounded by all of those famous people, especially at a young age, I imagine it would have affected your sense of self. Do you think it set you up for unreasonable expectations in your life, that you would be surrounded by all these famous people?
Well, because I was so young, my brother, sister, and I didn't know. They were just loud, drunk adults who partied really hard. And
rifled through your medicine cabinet.
Yes, and so I didn't. I couldn't talk to Billy Wilder about Ace in the Hole and do all those things that, when I looked, my father kept a scrapbook as if he knew these years would end someday.
Right, that's how interesting.
And it's my prized possession of his, because I look through it and I go, I can't believe all these people. Yeah. But for us, I didn't really appreciate who they were till I got really into wanting to be in movies, and my parents gave parties, and if they were really big parties, we would be in our bathrobes, and my sister in a little nightcap, and holding our homework, and we'd check into a hotel. So
that's so cruel, really.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. And then we were, if there was a party, we were sort of summoned before bedtime, and my brother and I in matching bathrobes, and my sister with a little Dickens nightcap, and we would come down, and all the adults would stop, and we were instructed, my brother and I, to bow, and my sister to curtsy, and everybody would go, ooh, and ah, that's so cute. But we were little, just circus acts. And then years later, I'm working with Dennis Hopper. And Dennis Hopper used to come to the house. That's right. This is well before Easy Rider, and he was an actor just upcoming. And we were smoking a joint. And he said, I remember you kids being trotted down stairs in your little bathrobes, bowing and curtsying. He takes a big hit. I think that was the saddest thing I ever saw in my life.
And Dennis would know, I suppose.
And he would know.
Yeah. You were really exposed to different kinds of fame too. Your best friend was Carrie Fisher, and you watched as Star Wars catapulted her into a kind of pop culture history. Your aunt was Joan Didion, who achieved great and perhaps even lasting literary fame. Your father was a massively popular author and TV presenter. I wondered, is fame good for people and we just convince ourselves otherwise to hide our envy, or is it actually damaging? And given that we seem to have only become more obsessed with fame and celebrity since those years, what would you say to younger generations who seem to court fame for its own sake?
I think don't breathe your own fumes,
Right.
And you kind of have to, it takes a tremendous amount of stability, and you have to be really anchored. And, usually, people become movie stars in their very early 20s, and they're still growing. And so to get all of that adulation, and most people, understandably, really can't handle it. And, they don't have long-lasting careers. But, you look at someone like Tom Hanks, he's the kind of person who just, he treated himself not just as an artist, but also the CEO of his own future.
Yeah.
He had a game plan, and he stuck to it, and he didn't fall into, the stereotypes of getting, fucked up every night and doing blow and getting in the paper for getting in car accidents and stuff. He just had an actor like that has real anchor and can handle all that. But it's because you're still a person. If you're famous, in a funny way, you become even more sensitive to public opinion.
Right.
You can be very hurt by these total strangers, particularly now with social media, just lashing out at you. Because there's always, now with social media, there's, no matter how beloved you are, there's going to be somebody who's just going to rag on you.
Yeah.
And if you're at a young age, that's the one you're going to look at.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. You can always remember the negatives, even if there's 20
exactly.
million. Yeah. How have you handled your own fame? Is that how you've sort of handled your own fame? And I wondered whether your attitude to yourself as this concept of yourself as a celebrity, whether that's changed over time. And
well, oddly, when I was writing the book, I've always kicked myself. Maybe this is also, I'm hard on myself, so maybe that's kept me, somewhat grounded.
Right.
I did not breathe if there were fumes coming my way. I made sure I didn't get anywhere near them.
right.
But and I've always thought, I kind of blew it. Why did I do that when I should have done this? And many actors kick themselves over choices that they made. But I never really felt in the world of celebrity, I'm pretty middling, but I always, I wasn't aware of how much I had accomplished.
Yeah.
And could actually be really proud of how much I'd done. I was writing the book, and I get to the very end, and I go, Jesus, I produced the Sidney Lumet movie.
Yes.
I did. I've worked with some of the greatest actors in the world, and
Madonna.
Let's throw her in the mix. And I thought, why have I been so hard on myself? Actually, it's been a pretty good run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So that when your actual act of writing the book, did that give you a perspective that you might not have had if you'd not done that?
Oh, without a doubt.
Wow.
Yeah. It's always there's something. I remember when my sister years ago, and then my daughter, them telling me, "Oh, Dad, I'm so excited. I want to be an actress." I went, "Oh God, please don't," because you're going to be tough on yourself, and you're going to get rejected, and because you're an artist, you have feelings, so you're going to take things personally.
Yes.
So I was struck by how little I sort of embraced my accomplishments until I saw them all written out, and I
Right.
could look back and give myself a break.
And maybe that was part of what kept you sane in some ways.
I think so.
And one of your best friend is Carrie Fisher. Sadly, she passed away far too young. She was 60 when she died. But she seemed to me to be someone who just didn't believe any of the bullshit. She just did not believe it. So you two being such great friends, that must have been part of your personality to not take in that.
Yeah, and it was also an unusual thing to be, we were best friends we met when I was 16 and she was 15, and we just clicked like that. And she moved to New York because I was living there, and then we became roommates, and she would go out in auditions, and I would go off to sell popcorn at a movie theater. And then, she gets this job that she couldn't be less thrilled about. And it's starring Harrison Ford, who I knew as a carpenter.
Yeah.
And I worshipped.
Yeah, and he was actually a carpenter. If you explained it, he was the carpenter for...
He was a carpenter for my aunt and uncle and built the deck of their house in Malibu. And I used to try to help him, and he had these joints that he would hand me. I'd take one puff, and I couldn't tell what a hammer looked like. But I worshiped this guy, and so he was in it. So I had a little envy about that. And then there was a Mark Hamill, who was like my age, like, how come I didn't get an audition for this kind of a thing? And then she would call me from London going, you know, oh, please don't be jealous about this. This movie is such a turkey. And you should see what I look like. I've got these bagels on the side of my head. And we walk around with ray guns. They don't even have triggers. You know, big monkeys following us. And then there's a little guy in a trash can rolling along. And she was convinced it was a real turkey until...
When did you put it like that? I can see why she would have been thought.
And we went to, Carrie and I and the cast went to the very first screening of Star Wars. They didn't even do card screenings or test it. And it was at the Ziegfeld Theater. It was the biggest theater in Manhattan. And from the moment that crawl was like, her life was never going to be the same. Movies were never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And sadly, for a time, our friendship wasn't the same because, you know, I was still working at Radio City Music Hall, selling popcorn. And suddenly, overnight, my best friend becomes globally famous.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were in a building with a doorman who we all loved, you know, a guy named Eddie, an Irish guy, and we're always joking around. And I come back from my night of work, and he says, "Good evening, Mr. Fisher." I went, "Mr. Fisher?" I said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Dunne." I went, "What's with the Mr.?" And so people looked at her differently. They looked at me, and suddenly, you know, her friends were all the people, you know, from Jackson Browne and the Eagles and Paul Simon, all these people I idolized were all now, you know, getting high in our living room. And I just thought, this isn't my time. I'm not supposed to be, these aren't my friends.
That's so interesting.
So I moved out and then we, you know, got it back together. And, you know, it's my fault. It was my flaw. I needed to I produced a movie. And once I starred in a play and I got very good reviews, and then I produced a movie, and then I felt, you know, this sort of paper stuffing to fill myself. And I thought, oh, okay, now I feel sort of unequal plane. And, you know, as silly as it sounds, it's sort of, I needed to feel like that.
And the friendship sort of got back on track.
Oh, right on track, right.
I wanted to talk about your dad. Your dad was Dominick Dunne. Your friends and family knew him as Nick. He was an extraordinary man in many ways. His relationship with fame and celebrity was a defining feature of his life, as you mentioned earlier, for better and for worse. I wondered how his sense of that changed over the course of his life. We'll get to one particular thing that definitely did change him, but that sense of the value of fame, did he eventually come to the realization that it was a straw man?
Without a doubt. I mean, he just he became sober, and he having lost everything. I mean, everything. It was unbelievable humiliation of, you know, having to sell all of his things and being unemployable and broke. He got in a car, now like a little Ford, you know, Tortina, whatever it was called, but he had a beloved Mercedes that he had to sell. And he drives up the coast of California and ends up in Oregon, directionless, just to get out of Hollywood. And the car breaks down in front of a rental cabins. And that's where he lived for a year without a phone.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where he taught himself how to write, which is what he always secretly wanted to do. And he would write, you know, his children letters on these yellow legal tablets that would be typed out, single space. And they were incredible letters of his journey and a lot of the times he'd go, "I can't believe I thought all that crap was important. I can't believe I was so superficial. What a phony." And so he'd be really hard on himself. And then he'd tell these hilarious stories of being in the rooms with all the different, in the AA rooms, of the incredible friendships he had with, firemen and nurses in hospitals and all different walks of life, and they all loved him. But he didn't have a television in his room, nor a telephone. And he never did I know every time a celebrity's name would come up in normal conversation, he knew them. He would never say it.
No.
And one time the owners of the cabin invited him to go to their place. They had a television to see the Academy Awards. And they didn't know anything about Dad. They just thought he was a man struggling with finances. And so he's watching the Academy Awards with these two people. And Elizabeth Taylor is, presenting. And the couple is going, she was married first to Richard Burton, then and they're going to the list. And he's going, they got the order all wrong. and he just is about to, and he produced a movie with Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
And he's just about to correct him and go, who cares? Yeah. Who cares? Wow. And it was so when he came back, he came back to New York. He came back to New York because he got, one of the things that motivated him to return was he was never going to go back to Hollywood, but he got a letter from Truman Capote, who found him his address. He has no idea why. And Truman Capote had just also been humiliated, exiled, lost all of his friends, his money, struggled with alcohol. And he wrote him and it said, listen, I know why you're there. I am there too. And I know what shame is, but that's not where you belong. You've got to go back and face your life. And so he moved back to New York. He lived 3 blocks from me. He lived in an apartment that was smaller than the first apartment I ever had. Not a word of complaint.
Wow. So it sounds like that period.
It was like, you either, when you face that kind of, failure, you either stay down there or you dig deep and you learn. And it was an incredible transformation of character.
And it really deepened your relationship with him, I think. You seemed that that's when your relationship with him really deepened. Is that fair
absolutely.
To say?
I know. I've never been so impressed with, even if he wasn't my father, if I knew his life story and the man that he became. And, when I moved to New York, I was I always thought of myself as the boxer and the Paul Simon song and, and knowing all the whores on 7th Avenue and the street people and everything. And we would sit outside in a cafe, and all these Damon Runyon street people, they all knew him. They go, hey, Dominick. And I go, how do you know these guys? He goes, well, they're all in the rooms. And he became like this a Damon Runyon type figure himself.
Right, yeah, interesting. He had that common touch, I suppose.
He really did.
Yeah. Which is surprising given his it's the common touch just must have been a part of him, perhaps.
It was, and he's always been unfailingly polite. He was never a snob or any of that stuff. But he had never. I don't think he'd ever lived so close to the ground.
Right.
And enjoyed it and learned from it. Right. And it improved his writing.
And it improved him as a person. Yeah. One of the tricky things for you, I would have imagined, being, a straight young man, was to discover that he was secretly gay. How did that affect your relationship with him? And can you remember the moment you discovered?
Yeah.
You put it in the book, actually, so I can remember
Sure.
it.
Well, when he, the real death knell to his character and his depression and drinking was when my mother broke up with him.
Yeah.
Even though he was closeted, his desires might have been in one direction, but his heart and his love for her was all in. I mean, he just couldn't believe. There was never a moment he wasn't completely in love with his wife. And so when she broke up with him, because he was pretty insufferable, And we were sort of relieved as kids to kind of have him, move out.
Right.
Because it was less restrictive and less tempers and less drama. And but when he moved out, I'm the oldest, and I sort of became the man of the family, even though I was like 11 or 12. And my mother would, she liked her wine as well. And we'd stay up really late, and I'd feel terribly grown up, and she'd give me a little wine like they do in Europe. and she would pretty much overshare. And that's when she told me, that trip you took to Hawaii with your dad, do you remember the other guy? And I do remember the other guy. His name was Dick Rosenthal. I thought he was the funniest man I'd ever met. And she said, well, that man was doing your father. Oh, that kind of makes sense.
So really that wasn't so, I would have thought that would be really shocking.
No, I actually thought, how grown up of me to handle this information. As I have my wine.
Yeah, true. What was the single most important thing your dad taught you about being a man?
When he came back to New York and he'd written a novel that was very well received. It was a bestseller, his very first book. And he was a star writer at Vanity Fair. He could not get over his gratitude that he was given this chance.
Right.
Was every day he'd just go, I can't believe my life. And he was still somewhat starstruck. I remember he left me this voicemail I kept for years going, Griffin, I got to tell you, I'm at the Chateau Marmont, and I'm in the elevator, and Bono is there. You know, the Irish singer Bono? And he goes, Griffin, Bono knows who I am. And so those things still got to him. Yeah. But then he sees Private Ryan, and it had just come out. And he calls me up, and he says, Griffin, you got to get over here right now. And he had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer, so I thought it was going to be, and he says, listen, do you know the movie Private Ryan? Saving Private Ryan? I said, yeah. He goes, and then he proceeds to tell me about when he was 18 years old, and he was drafted, and he was sent right at the end of the war, during the Battle of the Bulge, in the Ardennes forest, when him and another guy, who was his best friend, whose sexuality probably was also in question, these two were called the Glitter Twins, mocked by the troop, by their company. But these two were on forward positions in the forest, and they saw two Americans, trapped behind enemy lines. And he's telling me this, and he goes, and without a beat, we just look at each other, and then we just go behind enemy lines. And they carried these two guys all night long. And then he reaches in his pocket, and he takes out this medal, and he went, I got the Bronze Star. Mm. And he'd never told anyone this. And I could just see that's the kind of man he was going to be, that he always had that kind of courage, and which would show itself years later and continue to. But when it was something that real and that important, that's not the stuff you brag about.
That's
not a Bono story.
No, that's not a Bono story.
And it was, I couldn't believe he kept that to himself for that long.
Yeah, so interesting.
And it never dined out on it. He just told me. And the other guy's name was Hank Bretsky. And so he calls, he hadn't talked to Hank in like, oh God, 50 years or something, but he gets his number and he does it while I'm there. And he's talking to Hank and he goes, wait, talk to my son. And I'm going, oh, Mr. Bresky, it's so good to meet you. And he goes, yeah, your father, I'm coming into the city. He lived in Connecticut selling insurance or something. And he's taking me, he apparently owns a table at a restaurant called 21, which was like, you know, his table. He didn't own it. But, and he was about to come in and Dad was so excited to see him. And Dad goes to 21 on the appointed night and he waits and he waits and he waits. And he never showed up. And I called him the next day. So how was it with Hank? He goes, he never showed up. I don't know why you would blow me up. I went, that doesn't sound right, Dad. You know, call the house. Call him. And he calls and a young man answers and he asks for Hank and he goes, who's this? He goes, this is Dominick Dunne. I had plans with him. He goes, Mr. Dunne, my father passed away last night.
Wow.
And he said, you know, after your phone call, he told me about the war.
Wow.
And he'd never told me either.
Wow.
And thank God these two men talked.
Yes, exactly. It's incredibly moving. Speaking of which, in 1982, your sister Dominique was murdered by the man she was dating, throwing your family into an emotional and legal nightmare. We'll talk about the legal nightmare in just one moment. But in some ways, this awful event was kind of the making of your dad in some interesting way. What did you learn about him throughout that ordeal?
Well, it's more what we learned about each other. It was very much of a family between my brother and myself and my parents. We became incredibly close. There was not just from the murder. She'd broken up with this guy who we disliked, just had a bad feeling about, that we're all guilty. We didn't act on it more fiercely. But she broke up, changed the locks, and anyway, he came back and managed to get her to go outside, and she was and strangled her, and she was on life support for 5 days, and then we had a trial for the killer, and we were in the courtroom every day, and it was, you know, there's an expression we were told by this woman who started a group called Parents of Murdered Children. They were very supportive. They were also in the courtroom with us. And she was the mother of Sharon Tate, who was killed, and her name was Doris. And she said, in warning us about this trial, she said, you know, first they're going to kill Dominique. First they kill Dominique, then they're going to kill her again in the courtroom. And that's exactly what happened in the defense of, you know, of this blaming the victim. And it's particularly common and to this day in cases of domestic violence with a woman. It's the woman, they'll just portray what she was wearing, what, you know, digging completely irrelevant things. And on top of that, this man, which we were unaware, and Dominique was totally unaware, this man had a history of serious violence against other women. And we, with great bravery, this woman approached us. And we'd found out that she was sitting in her car watching us go into the church during the funeral. And she finally decided, I've got to contact the Dunnes and tell them what I know. And so she was brought on as a witness. And the judge, he dismissed the jury from hearing this harrowing testimony about him knocking her eye socket out and breaking her jaw in all these places and all of her ribs and the months she spent in the hospital. And the killer was so incensed by this that he got up from behind his table to approach her, and then was wrestled to the ground by the bailiffs, and he's screaming and you saw, oh my God, that's what Dominick saw. The jury did not see it.
No.
So the verdict, he ended up doing, they didn't even give him a murder sentence. It was called involuntary manslaughter. And he was out in 3.5 years. Mm. So when this travesty of a trial was over, the judge, who, whatever reason, hated our guts and ruled against every possible decision, he does the perfunctory, I want to thank the jury, and on behalf of the Dunne family, we thank you, the Dunne family thanks you as well. And my dad stood up in that courtroom, and it was a very high media, closely watched trial. There were cameras in the courtroom. And Dad shot up out of his, from the bench and said, don't thank them for the Dunne family. Don't thank them on our behalf. You kept important information from this jury. Mr. Dunne, you're going to be removed from the thing. Stop talking. No, it's too late. It's too late. You've ruined it. This is a terrible injustice. And my mother was in a wheelchair. She had MS. And he wheels her out. And they hit the blare of the media. And the media hears what happened that they didn't know. And then Dad writes, the very first thing he ever wrote that was published was about the trial, of which what I described was in the article. And it was also about what a family who has no relationship, has no history with the judicial system, what we went through. And this was a groundbreaking piece.
It was, but it was also must have been quite difficult for you. Tina Brown asked him at a party who was the new editor at Vanity Fair at that stage. It must have been quite difficult, I think, for you and for other members of your family, for your dad to be writing about the trial while it was happening.
It was, well, he was taking notes while it was happening, but he had to, and I wasn't really aware that he was sort of on the case until he had actually written the article. What was difficult was at that point in my life was having gone through all of this, then to have it be published and so widely read. And, I remember I was on a set that I was acting on, and it was during a break, and there were like 4 different people reading the article.
Wow.
And it was like, Jesus, that was like our thing. Now it's like everybody's thing. But what happened was I needed some perspective. And at some point, it took a few years, that article, if anyone was going to be important in my life, I would give them that article and say, you won't know anything about me until you've read this.
Wow.
And it's a document that, changed the way he came up with a journalism that was not being used at the time, that no one else was doing, which was, he was a crime reporter writing about O.J., writing about the Menendez brothers and Phil Spector, but he was writing it from the point of view of a man who'd been in the court system, who had suffered a terrible loss. So he never let the reader forget who Nicole was, or the Brown family and the survivors of that. And it always, it always took into account what the victims were going through, instead of the fascination with what the killer was thinking.
Yeah, that's so important. And I that leads me into another point about this. True crime, is sort of so ubiquitous now. And in some key ways, as you say, your dad was at the vanguard of that movement. Do you think that fact that your dad did really focus on the victims, do you think that has become lost now? Do you worry about true crime?
Yeah, I do. I think that's still going on. And I think, I think at least a quarter of the Netflix library is just one, a gruesome crime after another, and the I saw one that was recently about Phil Spector. That was a documentary about him.
That's
and,
right.
And, and the woman that he killed is named Lana Clarkson. And that was one of the few times where they really devoted time to Lana Clarkson.
Yeah.
This was at the time that this happened. She was an actress, a struggling actress. And the New York Times, they called her a B movie actress. Like, that's all she had. Like, she deserved to die because, she couldn't make it.
Yeah.
It was horrific for us at the time because we had that perspective. It was, it made my blood boil every time I read that B movie actress thing. But generally there is, who the people are killed are, the B storylines.
And for your family, I find just in even the smallest of injustices drives me crazy. How do you process grief and eventually let something go when the justice system really, failed you so egregiously?
Well, you don't really ever let it go. It alters the way you see life. You see relations between men and women in a completely different way. Just today, I'm walking. I know that there's domestic violence is as big an issue here as it is in America. And I was walking through Melbourne, and I came across a wall of remembrance of all the women. Oh God, there were so many who had died from domestic violence, and I took a picture, and I posted it from my. I didn't go into Dominick or anything, but I that's like something I think about all the time.
Yeah,
and made some sort of public pronouncement about this, and we have a president who only recently said, when a husband and a wife have a little spat, why do they have to call the police? It's only going to get worse.
And we've got it's only going to get worse. Yeah.
But also in terms of, years I spent tracking down the killer wherever he was in his life, and managed to get him fired a few times. And
small victories, but good ones.
Yeah, and also I would find out if he had a girlfriend, and they'd I'd track them down, and I'd tell her who this man is. So I'd broken up a few relationships, but at some point, that was driving me so much, and I was making very odd choices in my life and in my career and in my behavior, and because I was just so angry, and at some point, there wasn't a defining moment, but I went, wait a minute, I'm letting this guy get in the way of the memory of my sister. Why? And as soon as I had that thought, I just went, I don't care where he lives. I'm not going to track down. I'm not going to, he's not in my life. I'll never forgive him. I'll never forget, but he's the B story.
Yeah, that's so good. Dominick was a really terrific actor, and she had this great sort of natural quality that I actually see in your daughter Hannah. Hannah's an actor as well, and she was in a show that I loved, 𝐭𝐡𝐶 and the Jungle.
Yes, yeah,
and she was a terrific character, and that same kind of presence. And I wondered whether you got a chance with Dominick, and how you do with Hannah, talk about the actual craft of acting a lot. Did you share that together?
Well, when she when Dominick told me she wanted to be an actress, I did oh God, it's the worst. It's the worst. And I've been struggling so hard, and I could never do auditions. I'm dyslexic, and so whenever I'd always blow an audition. And I said, it's just going to break your heart, honey. Please don't. I mean, and especially for me, a woman in Hollywood. Ugh. And she got really angry at me. and then we lightened up and said, oh, we'll be the Lunts and we'll be the Bridges and we'll, you know. But a week later, she was on a soundstage in a TV movie called Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker, and she was the lead as the teenage hitchhiker.
Right.
1 week after this phone call.
Yeah.
I mean, she just had it.
She had it, yeah.
And they saw it immediately, and she never stopped working. Worked far more than me.
But you have a fantastic presence yourself on the screen, a lovely quality of your own. When did you know that you could do it? And what do you think as an actor, what you're most proud of?
Well, I think I think there are two things. I mean, I'll always be proud of After Hours, just because that was a case where, you know, I came across a script. My producing partner, Amy Robinson, first read it, but that I was able to like give myself a job, and a really good one, with a really great director. And it was, and it's a movie that didn't get the love at the time that it's getting now.
Yeah, it's such an important movie now, isn't it?
Yeah. And so now I can be...
and you're in it all the time, like it's really,
nonstop.
It is constant.
No, it was ridiculously fun.
It's incredibly funny, but it has a really great texture about it. There's something the nightlife of New York feels like you guys knew. You and Marty Scorsese really knew that.
Oh yeah,
yeah. You have the scene with this with these gay guys in a gay bar, and it's so like in the '80s that was always just a gag. But they're not. It's not a gag.
No, it's not.
It's just
like
part of the
that's
texture
what
of
it
the
is.
city.
Those guys are making out.
Yeah,
Cool.
it was beautiful.
I'll have another beer.
Exactly. It is a great film. There's quite a few questions here about practical magic. So I think we've got a few practical magic fans.
Okay.
One of them said that I was a devoted follower of your... Oh, no, hang on. Which was the one... actually, let's just ask. I'm just going to start... this was the one. Were you at all involved in the production of Practical Magic 2 is the first question. And nothing to do with you with Practical Magic 2, which apparently is coming out?
I guess so. Absolutely nothing to do with me.
And, you know, like... How did you end up becoming a director of Practical Magic? It's so interesting. You were kind of an actor, you were a producer, you were a director, you were all of those things.
Well, I moved into directing when I wrote a short movie that was autobiographical, that I used a bit of it in the book, of when my mother took me to a party. It was a party actually given by my aunt and uncle, but it was, you know, I didn't get all detailed about that. And it was on a school night, and my mother had just gotten a divorce, and she wanted a date for this party, and she told me Janis Joplin was going to be there.
That's right.
And so I asked my mom, you know, are you going to go around introducing me as your son? She goes, well, you want me to just treat you like you're a total stranger? And I went, yeah. And I said, if you see me talking to Janis, don't come up and say, you know, we got to go home, you know. And so I did that movie, and it discovered Tobey Maguire, and Uma Thurman was there, and it got nominated for an Academy Award. And then I did a movie with a very funny script, very kind of dark comedy for Warner Brothers called Addicted to Love, that did very well, but I don't think anybody's heard of it. I don't know. I have this gift for making movies people haven't heard of. But Sandy Bullock loved the movie, and Warner's, you know, wanted me to do another movie for them, and they gave me the script of Practical Magic, and I thought it was, and it was with Nicole Kidman and Sandy, who I loved, But I was bumping up against, I didn't say yes right away because, you know, magic and dragons and elves and things. I don't know. I don't have a feel for that. That didn't really, and even witches, you know, wasn't really my thing. But I looked at the generation of family. Family is something I do know about. Yeah. And strong women in a family over the generations is something I know about. And once I got that, then I got a real anchor on how to tell that story and tell it with humor. And then there were great scary bits that I had fun doing.
And I wonder what, you know, given that you'd worked with directors like Martin Scorsese, what did you learn from him that was valuable as a director, or did he help you more as an actor?
No, I learned a lot from him. Well, one, he gives you literally a movie every second day.
Right.
You don't know movies till you've seen this. Right. You don't know this. So it was an incredible education on how to look at movies, right, how to watch movies. But what I took away was is how much fun he had. You know, I mean, you'd see out of the corner of your eye him trying to not laugh and his shoulders jumping up and down. And it was just free, and try this and try that and try. And so I just totally stole that, right. You know, and I think if, you know, you could be doing the darkest tragedy ever, but if you're having fun making it, and if you're feeling, you know, excited, it's totally contagious, and right. People feel free. And I've always thought, you know, I brought that energy to my sets.
No offense, but it took you a long while to get around to writing. I mean, your dyslexia might have had something to do with that. But, you know, Carrie wrote a number of wonderful books of memoir. Your dad was obviously a prolific writer, and your aunt was one of the best of her, indeed, anyone's generation. Was it sheer intimidation that put you off writing this book?
No. I actually felt pretty... I'd been keeping... really funny stories, like about my great aunt. Yeah. After she finds out that her husband died in his sleep, which was a total lie. That's right. She turns to her lover and says, "Do you want to get married? My husband died." And then she takes him to the funeral. So I always kept that story. I got to remember that, and different things and kind of wacky things, not unlike After Hours, have actually happened to me. And I just been keeping a file. But when I started to write it in earnest, I wasn't intimidated. I was more inspired by father, uncle, and aunt, because they were so brutally honest about themselves. Yeah. And they didn't, and you know, my uncle John Gregory Dunne has this ability, which I didn't realize till I reread his book called Vegas that had just come out in the States, reissued, how much that book subliminally influenced me, because it's so self-deprecating, and you know, you know, when he's a teenager, just how horny he is, and all the ridiculous things he does, you know, trying to get girls. And I went, God, it's kind of like in my book. And
there's a bit of a Portnoy's complaint almost.
Exactly.
In there, yeah, for sure.
And so I felt kind of liberated. I thought, you know, as long as I just stick to the truth about myself and my observations, I'll be okay.
There's a great question here that I cannot believe that I didn't think of, so I'm just going to steal it, but it's from Anonymous. What is the Friday Afternoon Club, and should everyone start one?
Oh, I definitely see if this appeals to you. My sister coined the name of the Friday Afternoon Club because she was in an acting class that was on Fridays. And it was all these young actors just at the beginning of their careers. And George Clooney was a classmate, and Timothy Hutton, and Miguel Ferrer, and people became friends years later. And there was, and so on Friday afternoon, Dominick lived with my mother. they would all go to my mom's house and just drink like fish and party all night long. And my mother would come out in her wheelchair with a bottle of wine, just wheeling out. And they go, "Thank you, Mrs. Dunne, thank you." And I chose the title because it's sort of it's a very happy memory, and it's like as Dominique was, you know, she was at the beginning of her life, the beginning of, you know, what I think would have been really great things and quite an adventure she would have had. So it had a kind of, I don't know, playful, sort of mysterious, I wonder what that club is.
Yeah. So your mum actually is a fantastic figure in it. I don't know if you've ever read Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, but she reminds me of Mrs. Barber, you know, in her, who also has to, I mean, your mum, you know, ended up, you know, retreating to her bedroom and making her world her bedroom because she had MS. Mrs. Barber just does it because I think she's on barbiturates or something. But yeah, there's something wonderfully extraordinary about your mother too. They really were amazing people, your parents, weren't they?
Yeah, well, you know, as I said, my father, you know, created this style of journalism, you know, based on his personal tragedy, and my mother, who we thought, well, this trial and the murder, this is going to set her back. This is going to kill her. She's not going to. She actually found so much strength that she started her own victims' rights group that was, you know, Parents of Murdered Children was more of an emotional support group. She wanted to change laws. And she and her partner, also a victim of a daughter was killed in domestic violence, they started a group called Justice for Victims of Homicide. And they passed laws. They got laws passed in California that are now instituted in 25 states. And, you know, this woman was, my mother was so shy, but when she started this group, she would wheel out onto the talk shows and talk about what happened and how, you know, what happened to us and what happened to others' families of being treated, you know, so dismissively in the courtroom and not being involved in these backroom decisions and it just dealing with the egos of these men who just don't regard these families. Yeah, she was amazing. It strikes me that there are so many things that you barely touched on in your memoir. Certainly we haven't been able to touch on it here. You know, you starred in a film with Madonna, and I'm a bit of a Nicole Kidman obsessive, and the fact that you directed her is just so exciting to me. Can we expect a second memoir? Please say yes, even if you haven't written a word, that deals with all the things that we haven't got to yet because your life is so full, and Friday Afternoon Club so deliciously and so brilliantly captures so much of it. But there seems to me to be this enormous, it's like you've had 40 different lives. Yeah, things occur to me like going, oh, I can't believe I didn't put that in the book. Yeah. And you're going to ask me one, and now I don't remember, but I will as soon as this is over. But there'll be those sort of things. And I don't, right now I'm writing to find out what I'm writing about. Right, okay. That's all I got. I also think that, you know, given that Carrie's memoir, Postcards from the Edge, was made into a movie with just Meryl Streep and Shirley MacLaine, that this could make an amazing, amazing film. Netflix agrees with you. Oh, that's so cool. So that makes me think, you know, who's going to play Griffin? Griffin Dunne. There's just so many great performances ready to go, just waiting. It's going to be, you know, there's another alternate to this. You know, when I flew to LA to meet with Netflix, I had this thought that I thought, well, this is going to kill the deal, but I'm going to float it and just say, and I'm about to say what the idea is, and then the person from Netflix says, what do you think if we did the book, totally did the book, but what if we change the names so that it would just sort of give more freedom and be less on me. I don't want to look at a little Griffin. And I find that somewhat liberating. I mean, very, very early stages, so we'll see. But kind of like how, Succession, we all know it's the Murdochs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know that that's going to happen, but there's something that appeals to me about approaching it like that.
Oh, I think it's amazing. And given that, you are a director, an actor, a producer, and a writer, really the world's your oyster, I think. Is that fair to say?
I'm eating up a lot of oysters.
Griffin, on that note, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for your generosity and your wonderful, wonderful book. We will be selling readings. We'll be selling the book up in the salon, and you'll be signing copies of the book.
Signing.
So if you brought them, I'll get you to sign my copy as well if you can. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
What a joy. Everybody who's going to Practical Magic tomorrow night, where Griffin will be there to enjoy. I'm jealous. But thank you all for joining us, and please thank Griffin Dunne.